Oh geez, where do I begin? Well, for starters, welcome to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and today I'm going to tell you all the reasons why you should forget about the Colecovision. Um, the Colecovision is another one of those forgotten game consoles, rightfully so, that people do not, unless they had one when they were a child, have very fond memories of. And when they go back and explore it and investigate it, they're usually disappointed because it does nothing special. The ColecoVision is essentially nearly identical hardware and nearly identical software library to the Atari 5200, another forgotten game console I've already done a video on. Which means a lot of the software that the games you're gonna find on the ColecoVision are either basically the same as the 5200 version of that arcade game, meaning basically the same graphics and gameplay, etc., etc. It uses the same, almost identical controller, joystick, number pad, buttons on the side. I mean, it's basically the same fucking thing. The original, air quotes, exclusives, air quotes, to the ColecoVision software library are actually basically just clones of games that were also available on the Atari systems, which was standard practice at the time. If one company made a frog jumping on a lily pad eating flies game, another company made their version of that same game. If one company made a Pac-Man game, everybody made their own version of Pac-Man, Space Invaders, etc. So any game that you could find on the Atari, you could find more or less the same game on the ColecoVision. It just had a different title, slightly different graphics, and maybe modified gameplay. But it is, for all intents and purposes, just an Atari 5200 with a different coat of paint. That's literally, essentially all it is. Not like exactly, like proper use of the word literally all it is, but that's essentially all it is, more or less. Which again, there's no reason to own a 5200. There's even less of a reason to own a ColecoVision, with one minor exception. If you do invest in a ColecoVision and you get one that works, good luck. There is an adapter, which is hella expensive, that lets you play Atari 2600 games on it. Again, just like the Intellivision has the same little adapter plug-in thingy-mabob. So again, you had Atari's competitor basically admitting that their games weren't good enough, so buy their machine to play Atari's games. And it was like, or I could just save money and buy the Atari machine? Thank you very much. Yeah. For that reason, and due to lack of sales, lack of software variety, ColecoVision was one of the major contributors of the 1983 home console North American video game crash. And so there's not a lot of product out there. And what is out there is not great, to be honest. There's some playable games, don't get me wrong. They're just not special because you could get the exact same game on other consoles, or basically the same game with just a different title screen and slightly different colors and graphics, but basically the same game on other home consoles. And again, while it at the time was a quote graphical improvement over the 2600 and Intellivision, looking back on it today, it's not as noticeable as you would think. It's like, yeah, you got a few more pixels, I guess, on screen, and a few more colors, but you still have the same screen size area and RAM, and you have basically the same sound chip, more or less. So it's like, yeah, if you take a magnifying glass to it, you can spot the differences, but not really. It's not, like, obviously noticeable. I mean, in some games like Donkey Kong it is, or Berserk it is, but for the most part, not really. Not like, it's not, in some cases they are noticeably better than the Atari 2600 versions of the same game, but not enough to justify spending the money buying the hardware to get that specific version of Berserk when you're better off getting the actual arcade ROM via some sort of compilation or emulation or something else. Which is what the game you're going to want to play on the ColecoVision anyways, because the best game on the ColecoVision is Berserk, which is not a bad game. It's just not worthy of rushing out and spending a fortune to play an inferior version when you could literally just get the actual arcade version elsewhere. The rest of the software library on the ColecoVision is more or less forgettable, because like I said, it's basically just clones of games you've already played on other systems that you can get on other systems. For that reason, outside of the handful of straight arcade ports that came from like Namco or whoever that had been re-released on modern compilations like Namco Museum, Midway's Arcade Treasures, etc., there's not a lot of games that are available for the ColecoVision that have either been re-released in modern years or that are available on modern systems, like downloadable on the Xbox or PlayStation, etc. There is one, like, plug-and-play TV game that I am aware of that has some of the ColecoVision ROMs on it, but again, it's a Genesis-style controller, 3-button controller that plugs into your TV with AV cables, and a lot of the games that were made for the ColecoVision aren't playable with that type of controls because it requires a joystick and the number pad, which is not an easy control scheme to emulate or replicate with modern systems, which again is the same complaint I had with the previously mentioned 7800, Intellivision, and 5200. Basically, those 4 game consoles are not playable on modern systems because there's nothing that is comparable to their configuration. Not easily. Yeah, you can kind of remap the buttons and the joysticks and stuff like that, but it's not going to be intuitive based on the way the games were designed to be played. Even if you're playing it on a laptop or a desktop with mouse and keyboard and a joystick combination or whatever, even having access to a number pad, it's still not going to be intuitive because you got to switch from controller to number pad or whatever, or maybe use the WASD keys, I guess. I don't know. It's just not very intuitive. So again, you really don't have a viable option of playing ColecoVision games, and even if you did, they're not really worth playing in the first place, to be honest. Now, I had a ColecoVision years ago for the very purpose of being an obnoxious completist who had to have everything, and I thought the ColecoVision would be worth investing in, and I was wrong. It was a waste of money because it was like every game I played, it was like, oh, I just spent $60 on this game that is not any different than this other game I already have on the 2600 or 5200 or NES even, in some cases. It was like, oops, not worth it. Who's it for? Honestly, I don't know. I mean, obviously, if you had one as a kid, in 1984 or 3 or whatever, you probably have nostalgia for it and likely want to revisit it, but you don't have much in the way of options. Your literally best option is either tracking down original physical hardware, which is going to be expensive if it is functional, or require expensive repairs if it isn't functional. Which might not even be possible because I don't know if if the parts are even something you can source. Now, I do not know, so I will say this, if there are any retro clones that are compatible with ColecoVision cartridges, although I would say I highly doubt it because it's too niche. I do know there is a ColecoVision emulator option. It's not great because, again, you can't use the WASD plus the number pad with spacebar and enter keys because the games use a 16-way joystick and WASD is only four directions. So at best, you'd have to add QEZX to the mix, which is not intuitive for your fingers. Your fingers are programmed to sit on the WASD, and they're going to get lost as you fiddle around looking for the other keys, which means you're going to have a hard time playing the games. You could conceivably use like an Xbox One or PS4 style controller because they have the most buttons. I would argue the PS4 controller is probably the best if you're going to go emulation because it's got that touchpad in the middle, which you could map some things to. It's got dual joysticks, and it should have altogether enough face buttons to map the individual keys to. But even then, it might still be confusing and, again, unintuitive. But I have never been able to get ColecoVision games to a playable state using emulation. That's just me. Not because I can't get the emulation to work, the emulator to work or whatever, but just because the controls. Because you'll end up playing a game that has some controller scheme that doesn't make sense, that you have to have either the overlays or some PDF that you downloaded from the internet as a reference point to be able to understand how to play the game. It's not worth it. It just really isn't worth it. Even if you go through all the hassle to do that, you realize you're just playing Space Invaders, but it's a different name. But it's still Space Invaders. It's called something else. You know, like Space Visitors or something like that. But it's that's the software library on the ColecoVision. Games you've played elsewhere, just with different titles. And again, slightly modified graphics. You know, but that's it. That's more or less all there is to it. Who's it for? I would say nobody. There is no justifiable reason to own a ColecoVision or even try to attempt to emulate it to this day, unless you're going to track down an authentic ColecoVision controller or aftermarket controller with USB connections. That's your only viable option. And again, that might not be cost efficient. I don't know who is out there making USB ports or controllers of the ColecoVision. I don't know if anybody is. If they are, I don't know why they are. Now, it might be possible somebody did a Intellivision or 7800, 5200 style controller with a USB port that you could conceivably use, because it might be more or less compatible. But again, that's a lot of hassle to basically play a dollar store knockoff of Frogger. Are you really going to go through all that bullshit for that? It's not a great experience, in my opinion. A completist who has to own everything, your option is literally just buy the original hardware and the cartridges, put them on a shelf, and then just, show them off. Yes, that is the only person I could argue would probably have any interest in collecting ColecoVision product. As far as playing the games themselves, again, like I've already repeatedly said multiple times in this video, you're better off playing the actual arcade ROMs of the arcade ports, or the games that the ColecoVision version, whatever knockoff it is knocking off. It's just really, all things considered, not worth your time. Now, there might be roughly 7 or 8 true exclusives to the ColecoVision that were designed for it, but again, they're not likely to be fantastic games that are worth... They're not hidden gems, basically, is what I'm saying. You go through all that trouble just to find out that there's a reason why nobody bought the ColecoVision in 1983, and there's a reason why it contributed to the video game crash of 1983. Just so you know. Just put the pieces together. Stay away from the ColecoVision. It really ain't worth your time.